Horror movies! A genre of film that is loved by many but not respected by all. The feeling of being watched, the jolt of adrenaline, or the screams from your friend when they see a leprechaun attack a man with a pogo stick. Yeah, I'm not joking. That's a real movie. These films create an experience like no other and have truly impacted who I am today. They've even inspired me to make movies of my own, which are pretty bad.
You serious?
Having such a love for horror comes at a downside when you see how many people truly hate them. Horror movies are commonly viewed as stupid and disgusting movies filled with gore, nudity, and language, that their sole purpose is to scare and disgust. While there are some like this, I think horror films can be meaningful and thought-provoking films. But before we dive into why this is true, we must go back to where this bitter stigma began, taking us all the way back to a little year called 1978, when an indie film many of you are familiar with called Halloween was released. John Carpenter's Halloween was incredibly well received, gaining high praise from both audiences and critics alike. The film also grossed over $47 million at the box office, a staggering number when you realize it was made for a measly $300,000, which is almost nothing for making a movie. To put it into context, a movie that is considered low budget is $1 million. Striving directors saw the success of this film as a chance to make their own horror films for a similar budget. This sparked the horror subgenre slashers to grow in popularity, only having a few existing films in the genre prior to Halloween. This caused many amazing films to be made, such as A Nightmare on Elm Street, Scream, Sleepaway Camp, and Child's Play, directed by our good old buddy Tom Holland. No, not that one. Yeah, this one. And while there are many great films, the majority of the slasher genre films were, they were really bad. Most of those films believe that what made Halloween a successful film was its violence, villain, and nudity. In reality, that's not the case whatsoever. Halloween was a film that excelled at building tension with incredible cinematography, directing, music, and performances by Jamie Lee Curtis and Donald Pleasence. While it included nudity and violence, it was not meant to be over the top or explicit. In fact, producers asked Carpenter to have no blood in the film, and writer Deborah Hill created the characters as realistic and grounded people. These cheap slasher movies caused the general public to see horror as this explicit taboo, when in reality, many of the films are so much more than that. Movies such as The Shining, The Babadook, and Hereditary, and Halloween deal with topics such as trauma, the effects of depression, the cause of insanity, and if it's truly possible to rid the world of evil. The most effective horror films use horror to represent the message they are trying to get across. There are many films like this, but to keep it brief, let's take a look at 3 examples of horror media which represent this. First on our list is a little movie by the name of Hereditary. Hereditary is written and directed by Ari Aster, who recently directed the more popular film Midsommar, which is, interesting. Hereditary stars Toni Collette as a mother who has recently lost a loved one in her family. The entire film focuses around the idea of grief and how we deal with it. This is represented in how each of the characters react in their own ways to the tragedy. The father keeps it inside, hiding it, trying to hold his family together. The son lets it simmer in him, feeling the guilt continue to build inside him until he can't control it. And the mother searches to find peace and meaning from it, but discovers something sinister hidden behind it all. Here's a scene from the film where the family is sitting at a dinner table recently after the tragedy that the son is, in part, responsible for.
Sneer at you? I don't ever sneer at you.
Oh, sweetie, you don't have to. You get your point across.
Okay, so fine, then say what you want to say then.
Peter.
I don't want to say anything. I've tried saying
Okay, so
things.
try again. Release yourself.
Oh, release you mean?
Yeah, fine, release me. Just say it. Just say it.
Don't you swear at me, you Don't you ever raise your voice at me. I am your mother. Do you understand? All I do is worry and slave and defend you. And all I get back is that face on your face. So full of disdain and resentment and always so annoyed. Well, now your sister is dead. And I know you miss her, And I know it was an accident, and I know you're in pain, and I wish I could take that away for you. I wish I could shield you from the knowledge that you did what you did, but your sister is dead. She's gone forever.
This scene perfectly encapsulates the themes of the film and how we handle grief by Toni Collette's Oscar-worthy performance. After holding in this pain for so long, it finally erupts in a shocking and painful way. This scene is so effective because we as an audience can relate to it. We have all been through something hard in our lives, and this scene taps into that to drive home the feeling of that horror. The film's horror mainly stems from how real it feels. Supernatural events don't occur until the third act, and yet I consider this to be the scariest film I've ever seen. After watching the movie, I discussed it with my mom, and she described it as something that should have never been made. She described it in this way because it was disturbing, had nudity, gore, and had a dark ending. The hypocrisy in that statement is that one of her favorite shows is Game of Thrones, which contains disturbing content, nudity, gore, and a dark ending. Though, the ending of Game of Thrones is dark for a completely different reason.
You are my queen.
But both films contain the same content, and frankly, Game of Thrones contains worse. So, what's the difference? The difference is Hereditary has a sad ending, once again for different reasons. While I completely understand that an unhappy ending could turn people away, saying it shouldn't be made because of that is unfair. The sad ending represents a realistic outcome in the way that the family handled the situation, and seeing this can help us as an audience see things in our own lives that we can better so we don't go down a similar path. Granted, a path with no demon worshipping. Next, we have an Australian film called The Babadook, or The Babadook. Well, we're gonna go with The Babadook. The Babadook is directed by Jennifer Kent and follows a single mother who lost her husband and is left taking care of her son who is, absolutely insane. She reads him a book called Mr. Babadook, which summons a monster demon thing with a cute little top hat, as children's books do. Now, that sounds like a standard monster movie, but what makes this one special is the Babadook is the embodiment of trauma and depression. The tagline of the film is, "You can't get rid of the Babadook," which, yeah, is a cool line, but it means so much more than that. It shows that trauma will follow you throughout your life, haunting you. You can't get rid of it. And while you can't get rid of it, you can live past it and not let it control you. The ending of the film presents this idea by showing how the family is happy, but the Babadook is still with them, locked in their basement as if it's a pet. It's still there, but they have control over it. When the Babadook previously possessed the mother, she was brash and cruel towards her son, but once she had control over it, she was loving and kind. Kent uses the horror in the film to drive this message in a truly moving and brilliant way that made this one of the best films I've ever seen. Finally, we have my favorite show of all time, The Haunting of Hill House. Now, before we dive into this one, the Internet Movie Database, or commonly known as IMDb, ranks The Haunting of Hill House as the 162nd best show ever made. And while that might not seem very high, that's ranked above shows such as Westworld, Community, Schitt's Creek, and The Queen's Gambit. Every one of these shows have won Emmys, with The Queen's Gambit winning 11. I'll give you guys some time to guess how many Hill House won. Yeah, none. It wasn't even nominated, and yet it's ranked above all these other shows. Now, don't get me wrong, all of these shows deserve awards. The Queen's Gambit is my second favorite show ever made, but Hill House isn't getting the recognition it deserves. I could make a whole video on how horror isn't represented in award shows, but I digress. Sorry, wait, where was I? Oh, yeah. The Haunting of Hill House is directed by my favorite director, Mike Flanagan, who you might recognize as the director of Dr. Sleep, Hush, and most recently, The Midnight Club. The show follows a family called the Cranes in both the past, when they lived in Hill House, and the present, where their lives are now. Each episode follows one of the different family members and how Hill House affected their lives. The oldest brother, Stephen, used his experience at Hill House to become a horror author. The second child, Shirley, becomes a mortician. The middle child, Theo, becomes a child psychologist. And the twins, Nell and Luke, their lives fall apart. Each of the siblings represents the 5 stages of grief, Stephen being denial, Shirley being anger, Theo being depression, Luke being bargaining, and Nell being acceptance. The show uses this to represent how we deal with tragedy and how family is something that keeps us together. Each episode is compelling with realistic dialogue, beautiful cinematography, and gripping performances. Episode 6 is compiled by many 15-minute long takes, creating creative shots such as seeing the kids when they were younger and switching to their adult counterparts. The ending of the show is one that gives me chills every time I watch it, and I've seen the show 8 times. Yeah, 8 times. When I showed Hill House to one of my friends, they cried at the end saying it was beautiful and that they haven't cried at a show in a long time. Even my mom, who hates horror, said it was a great show. So, how is it fair that something that moved me and many others be considered disgusting and exploitative? If you don't like horror movies, I completely understand. I used to hate horror. When I was younger, I walked into the local Vision Video, rest in peace, and crapped myself every time I saw a Chucky DVD. All I'm asking is that people acknowledge that horror can be something more than blood and guts, that it can be something truly meaningful and impactful. I mean, it's impacted my life so much that I want to make horror films as my career. Horror is special in the way that it reaches into the darkness and pulls out topics that we as a society shy away from, like grief, anger, and guilt. It puts them in the spotlight and asks us to question things and understand that we're not alone in these feelings. And I think that's something pretty beautiful. I recently took a poll on Instagram asking if people thought horror could be meaningful and moving. Out of the 61 total votes, 85% of them said yes and 15% said no. Seeing this makes me think that maybe things are changing. Maybe people are starting to realize that horror can be something more than a jolt of adrenaline, that horror can be something truly meaningful. Thank you all so much for listening to my cheesy and over-the-top rant. It truly means the world, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.